What an appalling tragedy which should not have happened. She will, I'm sure, appreciate that not only did we receive 800 responses to the consultation, but at the request of the all-party group, the end of that consultation was delayed until the end of October. So all the decisions on the chair and the other things that need to be decided will, as I've already committed, be made to this House before the Christmas recess.
Thank you. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Thangham Debonair.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that members across the House will wish to join me in congratulating Sarah Clarke on her appointment as Lady Usher of the Black Rod. She will be the first woman to hold this role in its over 650-year history, and we offer her our best wishes. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the BBC are currently broadcasting Drugsland, a documentary series shot in my constituency of Bristol West, showing the catastrophic impact of drugs and drug laws, not just on users, but on the police and innocent bystanders. So will the Prime Minister commit to watching Drugsland and to a royal commission on our drug laws, which are plainly failing? I'm pleased to say that the Home Office, under my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, launched the government's drug strategy only a matter of weeks ago. We recognise the importance of this issue. Drugs significantly affect people's lives, and sadly we also see people dying as a result of drugs, taking drugs, but also the criminal activity that takes place around drugs. We take this very seriously. That's why we've launched our strategy.
Nigel Huddleston.
Divorce and family breakdown takes an emotional toll on all those involved, but the family dynamic often overlooked is that between grandparents and their grandchildren. If access to their grandchildren is removed or blocked, some grandparents call this a form of living bereavement. Will the Prime Minister therefore join me, Dame Esther Ranson, and thousands of grandparents across the country in calling for a change in the law to give grandparents access rights to their grandchildren, as is the case in France?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that, of course, grandparents do play an important role in the lives of their grandchildren. We can all, I'm sure, sympathise with those who experience the anguish when they're prevented from seeing their grandchildren if a parental relationship ends. Of course, when making decisions about a child's future, the first consideration must be the child's welfare. But the law already allows family courts to order that a child should spend time with their grandparents. And I understand that my honourable friend has recently seen the Minister of State for Justice, and I'm sure that the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Education will consider the points carefully.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined the Prime Minister in congratulating the new Usher of the Black Rod, and I'm really pleased it's a woman at last who's got that position. Mr. Speaker, I hope the whole House will join me in sending solidarity following the atrocious suicide bombing which killed 50 people in eastern Nigeria. We should speak with sympathy for those that have lost loved ones and the obvious trauma they're all going through. Mr. Speaker, the Irish Prime Minister, who has discussed Brexit with the British government, says sometimes it doesn't seem like they've thought all this through. So can the Prime Minister reassure him by clearly outlining the government's policy on the Irish border?
First of all, I'm glad that the Right Honourable Gentleman has welcomed the new Lady Usher of the Black Rod. I hope it isn't going to take 650 years before the Labour Party has a female leader. On the second issue that he raised, he referred to the issue of the attack that had taken place in eastern Nigeria, and of course, I'm sure the thoughts and condolences of the whole House are with those who have been affected by it. Now, he also asked me to outline our policy in relation to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Well, I'm very happy to do so. I have done so on a number of occasions. We are very clear First of all, that in relation to the movement of people, the common travel area will continue to operate as it has done since 1923. And on trade and movement of goods and services across the border, we will not see a hard border being introduced. We've been very clear. We won't put physical infrastructure at the border.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Foreign Secretary said there can be no border. That would be unthinkable. Well, maybe, but they've had 17 months to come up with an answer to this question, and there still is no answer to the question because they've not engaged with the negotiations properly. There's another person, Mr. Speaker, who doesn't think the negotiations are going too well, and that's the Right Honourable Member for Wokingham, who was a very enthusiastic campaigner for Brexit, but also, he's a busy man, finds time also to be the Chief Global Strategist for Charles Stanley Investments. And he recently advised clients to invest elsewhere as the UK is hitting the brakes. Does the Prime Minister take advice from the member for Wokingham, and does she agree with him?
If I can address the first issue that the Right Honourable Gentleman raised, we have been engaging fully in the negotiations in relation to Northern Ireland and other issues with the negotiations, and indeed significant progress has been made. That's why, for example, I've said that we have got agreement on the operation of the common travel area for the future. He says we haven't put any ideas about the border out. Well, I have to say to him, we actually published a paper back in the summer on the possible customs arrangements that could take place. We're very happy to move to further detailed discussions of the customs and trading relationship we will have not just between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but between the United Kingdom and the European Union. That does mean moving on to phase 2. And the question from the Right Honourable Gentleman is, if he thinks it's so important, why does his MEPs vote against it?
Mr. Speaker, the EU's chief negotiator said this week the UK financial sector will lose its current rights to trade with Europe. It seems neither EU negotiators nor the government have any idea where this is going. Last week, the Brexit Secretary said he would guarantee free movement for bankers post-Brexit. Are there any other groups to whom the Prime Minister believes freedom of movement should apply? Nurses? Doctors, teachers, scientists, agricultural workers, care workers, who?
I'm very interested that the Right Honourable Gentleman has found that his appearances at Prime Minister's Questions have been going so well. He's had to borrow a question from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, which he asked me last week. Perhaps the leader of the opposition should pay a little more attention to what happens in Prime Minister's Questions. We have been absolutely clear that we will be introducing new immigration rules, and as we introduce those immigration rules, we will take account of the needs of the British economy in doing so. That's why my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked the Migration Advisory Committee to advise on, as they always do, on those areas where we need to pay particular attention to migration coming into the United Kingdom. We want to get on to deal with the question of the future trading relationship that we have with the European Union. But I am also optimistic about the opportunities that will be available to this country and about the deal that we can get from the negotiations we're having. The Right Honourable Gentleman can't even decide whether he wants to be in the customs union, out of it, in the single market, out of it. He needs to get his own act together.
In April, Mr. Speaker, the Brexit Secretary was confident the European Banking Authority would be staying in London. Now he can't even guarantee banks having a right to trade with Europe. Last week, the government voted down Labour's amendments to protect workers' rights. The Foreign Secretary has described employment regulation as, and I quote, backbreaking, and repeatedly promised to, and I quote again, scrap the social chapter. Why won't she guarantee workers' rights, or does she agree with the Foreign Secretary on these matters?
We have guaranteed workers' rights. We have introduced a bill in the House of Commons to guarantee workers' rights, and the Labour Party voted against it.
Mr. Speaker, the record is clear. This government voted down our amendment to protect workers' rights. The Environment Secretary said he wanted a green Brexit. Yet again, Conservative MPs voted down Labour's amendments to guarantee environmental protection. On the 5th of December, Mr. Speaker, the European Finance Ministers' Summit takes place to address the issue of tax dodging as exposed by the Paradise Papers. There are 3 proposals on the table: to blacklist tax havens like Bermuda, new transparency rules for tax intermediaries, and mandatory country-by-country reporting for profit. Will the Prime Minister back these proposals, or is she still threatening to turn Britain into a tax haven?
I'll take no lectures from the Labour Party on dealing with tax avoidance and tax evasion. £160 billion more taken as a result of action taken by Conservatives in government. 75 new measures to deal with tax avoidance and tax evasion. And I'm pleased to say that recently HMRC won an important case on tax avoidance in the Supreme Court, which means a further £1 billion coming to the United Kingdom. He may talk about tax avoidance and tax evasion. It's this government that takes action and makes sure we collect it.
Mr. Speaker, her predecessor blocked EU-wide proposals for a public register of trusts. And again, the Conservative MPs have voted down Labour's amendments to deal with tax avoidance. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Brexit, this government is a shambles.
Far too many members are gesticulating on both sides of the House in a frenetic and, frankly, outlandish fashion. Order, I say to the honourable gentleman member for Helion and Yar, he should seek to imitate the Zen-like calm and statesmanship of the father of the House, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
I have much in common with Zen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 17 months. I understand, Mr. Speaker, the Tory whips are these days choreographing who to shout at who in the chamber. You're making a very bad job of it. Mr. Speaker, 17 months after the referendum, they say there can be no hard border, but haven't worked out how. They say they'll protect workers' rights, then vote against it. They say they'll protect environmental rights, then vote against it. They promise action on tax avoidance, but vote against it time and time again. And, Mr. Speaker, once again the Foreign Secretary offers his opinions, as does the Environment Secretary, saying there is insufficient energy going into these Brexit negotiations.
You said it. You said it.
Their words, Mr. Speaker, not mine. Isn't the truth? This government has no energy, no agreed plan, and no strategy to deliver a good Brexit for Britain.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he talks about voting against tax avoidance measures. It was the Labour Party that refused to allow tax avoidance measures to go through in a bill before we called the general election. So he should look at his own record, and he talks about people taking different opinions. I might remind him that on Monday in the bill, perhaps the Shadow Chancellor would like to listen to this. Yes. On Monday, when we were putting through that important piece of legislation in relation to customs and taxation in Europe, 76 Labour MPs voted in a different lobby from his and his front bench. The party in this Commons that has no clue on Brexit is the Labour Party. But And week out, the right honourable gentleman, week in and week out, the right honourable gentleman comes to this House and talks down our country and is pessimistic about our future. Well, let me tell him, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about our future. I'm optimistic about the success we can make of Brexit. I'm optimistic about the well-paid jobs that will be created. I'm optimistic about the homes we will build. That's Conservatives building a Britain fit for the future. All he offers is a blast from the past.
Reassure people that this Conservative government is committed to maintaining the United Kingdom's strong commitment to the highest standards of animal welfare, both now and post-Brexit.
Well, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that commitment. We already, as she and others will know, have some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world. And as we leave the EU, we should not only maintain but enhance those standards. We've already set out our proposals to introduce mandatory CCTV in slaughterhouses, increase sentences for animal cruelty to 5 years, ban microbeads which damage marine life, and ban the ivory trade to help bring an end to elephant poaching. And we also recognise and respect that animals are sentient beings and should be treated accordingly. The Animal Welfare Act 2006 provides protection for all animals capable of experiencing pain or suffering which are under the control of man. But I reaffirm to my honourable friend that we will be ensuring that we maintain and enhance our animal welfare standards when we leave the EU.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how many jobs have been lost this week with the departure of the European Medicines Authority and the European Banking Authority from London?
To the honourable gentleman that of course we are seeing those particular two agencies leave the United Kingdom and go elsewhere in the European Union. But when he talks about the number of jobs being created, we have seen under this government 3 million jobs being created. That's a record I would have thought even he would be willing to welcome.
And Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but of course the Prime Minister refused to answer the question. Let me tell her, just so she is aware of the cost of the hard Tory Brexit. Losing the EMA and the EBA means that losing over 1,000 jobs. And the Bank of England have told us that the city will lose 75,000 jobs. Jobs are already gone, jobs are going. Brexit is already biting. Will the Prime Minister recognise that exiting the EU is losing jobs and sector excellence from the United Kingdom?
I recognise, as I said, that those two particular agencies are leaving the United Kingdom. But the right honourable gentleman talks about numbers of jobs being lost. I repeat, since the Conservatives came into government, 3 million jobs have been created. That's 3 million more people in work. That's 3 million more people able to provide an income for themselves and their families.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, housing associations generated £5.5 billion in cash surplus, money that could be used to build 48,000 new homes in this country. The accumulated reserves that housing associations have come to £42 billion, which would mean 36,500 properties a year for the next 10 years could be built. Will my right honourable friend look at ways that we can make sure that housing associations use the money to build the new homes that people want, rather than having them sitting in the bank?
My honourable friend does raise an important point, and of course this whole issue of housing, and particularly homelessness, is something that he has been a campaigner on and campaigned strongly on. But this is in fact already the approach that is taken by housing associations. They're non-profit organisations, so their surpluses are reinvested in the business, often in the next year. And in fact, for example, in 2015-16, their investment in new and existing properties was more more than double the surpluses that they generated. Now, I've recently announced an additional £2 billion funding for homes, for affordable homes, including for social rent. Last week, housing associations were reclassified to the private sector. That takes £70 billion of debt off the country's balance sheet, which means greater certainty for housing associations to get on with the job that my honourable friend and I both want them to do, which is building more homes.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my thoughts are with my many constituents who've got friends and family in Nigeria at this time. Mr. Speaker, the SNP has asked 140 times for the VAT paid by our police and fire services to be scrapped, and for the £140 million to be refunded. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor said only last month that legally we would not be able to recover VAT, and that the UK government is now constrained by the VAT rules that are in place. Was he misleading us?
I think the SNP may have answered a number of questions, but of course the SNP knew when they took the decision to create a single police and fire authority that this would be the VAT treatment.
Veto Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the revised housing proposals that will force unprecedented numbers to the equivalent of a new town in what is left of Medway's Green Belt, will the Prime Minister give me and my constituents the assurances and the necessary large-scale investment which will need to be made to boost public service infrastructure, which will have to cope with up to 100,000 more people?
This is, of course, an important point for people not just in my honourable friend's constituency but elsewhere. We do want to see more homes being built because I want young people to have the prospect that they are going to have the future that their parents and grandparents were able to have, to owning their own homes. So we are going to go further in building more homes, but she's absolutely right that, of course, as we do that, we need to make sure the infrastructure is in place. We are putting in billions from central government for economic infrastructure every year up to 2021. That includes issues like transport projects, fibre broadband connections, but we recognise the importance of making sure the homes are supported by the right infrastructure.
Jane Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud that the last Labour government lifted more than 1 million children out of poverty. This government seems committed to doing the very opposite. With the Institute of Fiscal Studies predicting that an additional 1.2 million children will be pushed into poverty by 2021, and that's on top of the 4 million in 2015-16. Is the Prime Minister proud of her government's record of failure on this, and does she think this worrying forecast is acceptable?
I have to say to the honourable lady that far from the way in which she has portrayed the situation, we have seen since 2010 600,000 fewer people in absolute poverty. That's a record low. 300,000 fewer working-age adults in absolute poverty, and 200,000 fewer children in absolute poverty. 200,000 fewer children in absolute poverty. What we've also seen is families getting into work, nearly 1 million fewer workless households as a result of the actions of this Conservative government.
Kirsten Hare.
As the Prime Minister is aware, Scotland is lagging behind the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of super-fast broadband rollout, with my constituency of Angus even further behind that poor Scottish average. A huge volume of my casework from one of my largest towns of Arbroath, where 20,000 of my constituents reside, it is hardly what you would deem a remote area. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the next generation of UK funding to support the rollout of Scotland's full fibre broadband will bypass that shambolic Scottish government?
I'm very happy to confirm that to my honourable friend. She will know that we are making progress in Scotland in this, but we do need to go further. So programmes like local full fibre networks and 5G will allocate funding directly to local projects based on the quality of the bids put forward. And my honourable friend, the Minister for Digital, has recently confirmed in the House that for the next generation of technology, we will deliver it directly to local authorities in Scotland, rather than going through the Scottish Government, because we will make sure that Scotland is not left behind.
Yasmin Qureshi!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, an inquiry was set up to look into the drug Tramadol given to millions of pregnant women in the 60s and 70s, which caused deformities, and documents showing a clear cover-up. Last week, a report was published which was condemned by MPs across the House as being whitewashed and misleading. Will the Prime Minister meet the victims and order a public inquiry so justice can finally be done for these people?
You know, this is an issue that a number of members have been concerned about, and I recognise that the result of that review was not what some members and families were hoping for. It was a comprehensive, independent scientific review of the available evidence by experts. All the meetings of the expert working group were attended by Nick Dobrick as an invited independent expert from the Thalidomide Trust and at the request of the patient group, ACDHPT. And the overall conclusion, I'm informed, is that the scientific evidence does not support a causal association, but that doesn't detract from the very real suffering that has been experienced by the families. And I recognise that these conclusions are hard to accept, but the Department of Health is focused on implementing the review's recommendations, which will strengthen detection and better communicate the risk of medicines during pregnancy.
Stephen Hammond.
Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the right revised offer to the EU, far from throwing money away, will be worthwhile to secure the UK's future trade relationship with our European neighbours?
As I say to my honourable friend, he does raise an important issue. I set out in my speech in Florence that the UK will honour the commitments that we've made during our period of membership. We don't want our European partners to fear that they will have to receive less or pay in more during the current budget plan as a result of our leaving the European Union. But we can only resolve the financial implications of the UK's withdrawal finally as part of the settlement of all the issues that I spoke about in Florence. But once that is done, of course, the days of Britain paying vast sums of money to the EU every year will end.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every Prime Minister since 1946 has successfully appointed a British judge to the International Court of Justice. Why hasn't she?
Can I actually say to the honourable gentleman that the British Prime Minister does not appoint judges to the International Court of Justice. There is a process that is undertaken in the United Nations. We wish all the judges who have been appointed by the votes through the United Nations to the International Court of Justice well.
Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend might be aware that in a Westminster Hall debate last week, members of the Scottish National Party declared that if the Scottish Government did not agree with the final Brexit deal, they would push for another independence referendum. This obsession with breaking up our United Kingdom is damaging the Scottish economy and causing uncertainty. So will she join me today in calling for the SNP to drop, once and for all, their obsession with a second independence referendum?
The point that my honourable friend raises is a very important one. Scotland had a referendum in 2014. That referendum was legal and fair, and the result was decisive. The people of Scotland voted clearly to remain part of the United Kingdom. And I think at the election they sent a second message that they didn't want a second referendum on this issue. So I say to the Scottish Government, as we prepare to leave the EU, they should be working with us, with the UK Government, to get the right deal for the whole of the UK, not taking Scotland back to these divisive constitutional debates of the past. And so I agree with my honourable friend that the SNP should take their unwanted proposal off the table once and for all.
Nick Dakin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister support steel jobs in Scunthorpe and elsewhere by guaranteeing if the current flexibility within the emissions trading scheme is not retained to March 2019, that she will act immediately to ensure British industry is not financially penalised.
The honourable gentleman raises an important point about steel, and of course this government has done a considerable amount over the last few years to support the steel industry here in the United Kingdom. I was very pleased to be able to, earlier in the year, to make a visit and meet with steel workers and talk about the prospects for steel here in the United Kingdom. And we will, of course, look carefully to ensure that the arrangements that are in place are those that are right in the national interest, and we have supported steel in the past.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Can I take my right honourable friend back to the first question asked by the honourable lady for Bristol West? And quite apart from commending the quality of the BBC programme that she referred to, on the whole issue of prohibition of drugs globally, can I draw her attention to the fact that global policy is beginning to change, and that in the face of the evidential failure of the policy since the 1961 UN Single Convention on prohibition of narcotics drugs? And will she look at the evidence that's going to emerge in the United States and Canada on the legalisation and regulation of cannabis markets there, as well as decriminalisation in Portugal and elsewhere? And
gravamen of the inquiry from the honourable gentleman. We're a little clearer than we were, and we're immensely grateful. No, quite enough. We're very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Prime Minister.
Yes, well, I can say to my honourable friend that, of course, when I was Home Secretary, the piece of work was undertaken by the Home Office, which did look at the experience in a number of countries and the different ways in which they approach this issue of drugs. But I'm afraid I do just have to say to my honourable friend that I take a different opinion from him in relation to drugs. And I think that those who are dealing with people who have been affected by drugs would also do so. I think of my constituent, Elizabeth Burton Phillips, who set up Drug Fam after the suicide of her son, who was a drug addict. The work she is doing with families who are affected because a member of the family is on drugs, and the incredible damage that can do to families and to the individual concerned. I'm sorry, I say to my honourable friend, I take a different view. I think it's right that we continue to fight the war against drugs.
The honourable member for Chesterfield has migrated a considerable distance from his usual place, but we look forward to hearing from him anyway. Toby Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, people with the most severe disabilities have discovered that when they move on to universal credit, they're up to £100 a week worse off. This is because there's no severe disability component in the payment. So whatever happens about delays in the next hour, does the Prime Minister realise that universal credit will continue to shame her government whilst ever it pushes the most disabled into the worst poverty?
I say to the honourable gentleman that we spend over £50 billion a year on benefits to support disabled people and people with health conditions. That's increased by more than £7 billion since 2010. And spending on disability benefits will be higher in every year to 2020 than it was in 2010. And as regards universal credit, as I've said in this chamber before, universal credit is a simpler, more straightforward system. But crucially, universal credit is helping people get into the workplace and making sure that they keep more of the money that they earn.
Sir David Amis!
Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating the Leigh-on-Sea branch of the British Legion, local artists Beth Hooper and Mary Lister, on using a lottery grant for school children in Southend to make 7,500 ceramic poppies and display them on Southend's cliffs? And would she agree with me it's a further good reason to make Southend-on-Sea a city?
Well, I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in congratulating the Leigh-on-Sea branch of the Royal British Legion in the work that they have done in ensuring that young people actually recognise the importance of remembrance and recognising the sacrifices that have been made by previous generations for our safety and security. And as to his second point, that's a very interesting bid that he's put in. I know Southend-on-Sea is close to his heart and he champions it all the time, and I'm sure his bid will be looked at carefully.
Hardy!
Thank you. Prime Minister, my constituent Hayley Crawley is having palliative care for bowel cancer.
and she needs the specialist cancer drug that's available for other cancers. She waited months to hear that her case for funding was rejected by NHS England, and we are now waiting again to hear a reply for her appeal. Please will the Prime Minister write to NHS England and ensure that Hayley's case is treated as a priority?
Well, obviously, I'm aware this will be causing distress to Hayley while she is waiting for this appeal decision to come through, and I'm sure the Secretary of State for Health will look closely at the case that the Honourable Lady has raised. We were of course able to bring in the Cancer Drugs Fund, which has enabled some patients to get access to drugs that otherwise would not be available, but I recognise the concern and distress that her constituent will be suffering from while she awaits for this decision.
The Prime Minister will be aware that under President Mugabe, British citizens living in Zimbabwe, especially landowners, suffered considerably. Can she give an assurance to the House that, as we see a new regime coming into Zimbabwe, the British government will do all it can to persuade the new regime to treat British citizens living lawfully in that country, treat them with respect and the safety and security that they should have, along with all other Zimbabwean citizens?
Yes. Well, my honourable friend does raise an important point as we see this change taking place in Zimbabwe, and I have to say that the resignation of Robert Mugabe, I think, provides Zimbabwe with an opportunity to forge a new path free from the oppression that has characterised the past. We want to see a democratic, free, secure Zimbabwe where people across communities, from communities across Zimbabwe, are able to carry out their lives without fear, without oppression, and we want to see that country rejoining the international community. We have obviously provided some support to Zimbabwe in terms of UK aid. And as their oldest friend, we will do everything we can to support their change into a country that is free, that is democratic, that is free of all oppression for all communities.
Order. Presentation of Bill, Geraint Davis.
Clean Air Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 1st of December 2017, Mr. Speaker.
Friday the 1st of December 2017. Thank you. Order.
Order. Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available in the vote office at the end of the Chancellor's speech. I also remind honourable members that it is not the norm to intervene on the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Leader of the Opposition. I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Right Honourable Philip Hammond.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I report today on an economy that continues to grow, continues to create more jobs than ever before, and continues to confound those who seek to talk it down. An economy set on a path to a new relationship with our European neighbours and a new future outside the European Union. A future that will be full of change. We express our resolve to look forwards, not backwards, to embrace that change, to meet those challenges head on, and to seize those opportunities for Britain. The negotiations on our future relationship with the EU are in a critical phase. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has been clear that we seek a deep and special partnership based on free and frictionless trade in goods and services, close collaboration on security, and strong mutual respect and friendship. And as Chancellor, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am clear that one of the biggest boosts we can provide to businesses and families, one of the best ways to protect British jobs and prosperities as we build that new future, is to make early progress in delivering my right honourable friend's vision, with an implementation agreement that allows businesses to plan and invest with confidence. And this government will make the pursuit of that progress a top priority in the weeks ahead. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we work to achieve this deep and special partnership, we are determined to ensure that the country is prepared for every possible outcome. We have already invested almost £700 million in Brexit preparations. And today I am setting aside over the next 2 years another £3 billion, and I stand ready to allocate further sums if and when needed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, no one should doubt our resolve. But this budget is about much more than Brexit. The world is on the brink of a technological revolution, one that will change the way we work and live and transform our living standards for generations to come. And we face a choice. Either we embrace the future, seize the opportunities which lie within our grasp, and build on Britain's great global success story, or, as the party opposite advocates, reject change and turn inwards to the failed and irrelevant dogmas of the past. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have no doubts. We choose the future. We choose to run towards change, not away from it, to prepare our people to meet the challenges ahead, not to hide from them. And the prize will be enormous, because for the first time in decades, Britain is genuinely at the forefront of this technological revolution, not just in our universities and research institutes, but this time in the commercial development labs of our great companies and on factory floors and business parks across this land. But we must invest to secure that bright future for Britain, and at this budget, that is what we choose to do. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are listening and we understand the frustration of families where real incomes are under pressure. So at this budget, we choose a balanced approach. Yes, maintaining fiscal responsibility as we at last see our debt peaking. Continuing to invest in the skills and infrastructure that will support the jobs of the future. Building the homes that will make good on our promise to the next generation. But crucially, also helping families to cope with the cost of living. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we invest in our country's future, I have a clear vision of what that global Britain looks like. A prosperous and inclusive economy, where everybody has the opportunity to shine, wherever in these islands they live and whatever their background, where talent and hard work are rewarded, where the dream of home ownership is a reality for all generations, a hub of enterprise and innovation, a beacon of creativity, a civilised and tolerant place that cares for the vulnerable and nurtures the talented, an outward-looking, free-trading that is the Britain that I want to leave to my children, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a Britain we can be proud of, a country fit for the future. I know we will not build it overnight, but in this budget today, we will lay the foundations. With inflation peaking at 3% in this quarter before falling back towards target over the next year. And today I reaffirm the remit for the Independent Monetary Policy Committee and its 2% CPI inflation target. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we took over an economy with the highest budget deficit in our peacetime history. Since then, thanks to the hard work of the British people, that deficit has been shrinking, and next year will be below 2%. But our debt is still too high, and we need to get it down, not for some ideological reason, but because excessive debt undermines our economic security, leaving us vulnerable to shocks, because it passes the burden unfairly to the next generation, and because it simply cannot be right to spend more on our debt interest than we do on our police and our armed forces combined. So I'm pleased to be able to tell the House that OBR expects debt to peak this year and then gradually fall as a share of GDP, a turning point in our recovery from Labour's crisis. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, apparently not everyone shares the view that falling debt is good news. I've heard representations from the party opposite suggesting increasing the debt by £500 billion, taking us back to square one, wasting an extra £7 billion a year on debt interest. Mr Speaker, if they carry on like that, there'll be plenty of others joining Keisha Dugdale in saying, "I'm Labour, get me out of here." Mr Deputy Speaker, it must be. Mr Deputy Speaker, I have rejected these representations, and instead I reaffirm our pledge of fiscal responsibility and our commitment to the fiscal rules I set out last autumn. But now I choose to use some of the headroom I established then, so that as well as reducing debt, we can also invest in Britain's future, support our key public services, keep taxes low and provide a little help to families and businesses under pressure. A balanced approach that will prepare Britain for the future, not seek to hide from it. Today the OBR confirm that we are on track to meet our fiscal rules. Borrowing is forecast to be £49.9 billion this year. That's £8.4 billion lower than forecast at the spring budget. And after taking account of all decisions since the spring budget, the OPR's GDP revision and the measures I will announce today, borrowing will fall in every year of the forecast, from £39.5 billion next year to £25.6 billion in 22-23, to reach its lowest level in 20 years. As a percentage of our GDP, it falls from 2.4% this year to 1.9% next year, then 1.6, 1.5, 1.3 and finally 1.1% in 22-23. The OBR forecasts the structural deficit to be 1.3% of GDP in 2021, giving £14.8 billion of headroom against our 2% target. Debt will peak at 86.5% of GDP this year. It will then fall to 86.4% next year, then 86.1, 83.1, 79.3 and finally 79.1 in 22-23. The first sustained decline in debt in 17 years. Mr Deputy Speaker, under Conservative-led governments, the hard work of the British people is steadily clearing up the mess left behind by Labour. Mr Deputy Speaker, at the heart of global Britain must be a dynamic and innovative economy. On Monday, the Prime Minister set out the key elements of our modern industrial strategy, a strategy to raise productivity and wages in all parts of our country and to guarantee the brighter future we have promised to the next generation. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will present a white paper to the House in the next few days. But this is not just an economic plan. It is a key part of our vision for a fairer Britain, a Britain where every one of our citizens can contribute to and share in the benefits of prosperity. And the key to raising the wages of British workers is raising investment, public and private. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, we are investing in Britain's future. £500 billion since 2010. The biggest rail programme since Victorian times, the largest road building programme since the 1970s, the biggest increase in science and innovation funding in 4 decades, and the 2 largest infrastructure projects in Europe, Crossrail and HS2. When I took this job, I committed to make the battle to raise Britain's productivity, and thus the nation's pay, the central mission of the Treasury. Last autumn, I launched the National Productivity Investment Fund to provide an additional £23 billion of investment over 5 years to upgrade Britain's economic infrastructure for the 21st century. Today, I can announce that I will extend this fund for a further year and expand it to over £31 billion. Meaning, Mr Deputy Speaker, that public investment under this government will, on average, be £25 billion per year higher in real terms than under the last Labour government. We are allocating a further £2.3 billion for investment in R&D, and we'll increase the main R&D tax credit to 12%, taking the first strides towards the ambition of the industrial strategy to drive up R&D investment across the economy to 2.4% of GDP. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Britain is the world's 6th largest economy. London is the #1 international financial services centre. We have some of the world's best companies and a commanding position in a raft of tech and digital industries that will form the backbone of the global economy of the future. Those who underestimate Britain do so at their peril. Because we will harness this potential and turn it into the high-paid, high-productivity jobs of tomorrow. Others may choose to reject the future. We choose to embrace it. A new tech business is founded in Britain every hour, and I want that to be every half hour. So today, we invest over £500 million in a range of initiatives, from artificial intelligence to 5G and full fibre broadband. We support regulatory innovation with a new Regulators Pioneer Fund and a new Geospatial Data Commission to develop a strategy for using the government's location data to support economic growth. And to help our tech start-ups reach scale, we asked Sir Damon Buffini to review the availability of patient capital, and I'm very grateful to him. Today we're publishing an action plan to unlock over £20 billion of new investment in UK knowledge-intensive scale-up businesses, including through a new fund in the British Business Bank, seeded with £2.5 billion of public money, by facilitating pension fund access to long-term investments, and by doubling EIS investment limits for knowledge-intensive companies, while ensuring that EIS is not used as a shelter for low-risk capital preservation schemes. And we stand ready to step in to replace European Investment Fund lending if necessary. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is perhaps no technology as symbolic of the revolution gathering pace around us as driverless vehicles. Now, they surely don't want me to make that joke about the Labour Party again, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know that Jeremy Clarkson doesn't like them, but there are many other good reasons to pursue this technology. So today, we step up our support for it. Sorry, Jeremy, but definitely not the first time you've been snubbed by Hammond and May. Our future vehicles will be driverless. Our future vehicles will be driverless, but they'll be electric first. And that's a change that needs to come as soon as possible for our planet. So we'll establish a new £400 million charging infrastructure fund, invest an extra £100 million in plug-in car grant, and £40 million in charging R&D. And I can confirm today that we will clarify the law so that people who charge their electric vehicles at work will not face a benefit-in-kind charge from next year. The tax system can play an important role in protecting our environment. We owe it to our children that the air they breathe is clean. We published our air quality plan earlier this year, and we said then that we would fund it through taxes on new diesel cars. From April 2018, the first-year VED rate for diesel cars that don't meet the latest standards will go up by £1, and the existing diesel supplement in company car tax will increase by 1 percentage point. Drivers buying a new car will be able to avoid this charge as soon as manufacturers bring forward the next generation cleaner diesels that we all want to see. And we only apply this measure to cars. So before the headline writers start limbering up, let me be quite clear. No white van man, no white van woman will be hit by these measures. This levy will fund a new... This levy will fund a new £220 million Clean Air Fund to provide support for the implementation of local air quality plans, improving of the quality of the air in cities and towns up and down the UK. But our air quality is sadly not our only environmental challenge. Audiences across the country, glued to Blue Planet 2, have been starkly reminded of the problems of plastics pollution. The UK led the world on climate change agreements and is a pioneer in protecting marine environments. And I want us now to become a world leader in tackling the scourge of plastic littering our planet and our oceans. So with my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, I will investigate how the tax system and charges on single-use plastic items can reduce waste. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot keep our promise to the next generation to build an economy fit for the future unless we ensure our planet has a future. Mr Deputy Speaker, meeting the challenge of change head-on means giving our people the confidence to embrace it and the skills to reap the rewards from it, and we have a plan to do so. We're delivering 3 million apprenticeship starts by 2020 thanks to our apprenticeship levy, and I'll keep under review the flexibility that levy payers have to spend this money. We're introducing T-levels, and today I provide a further £20 million to support FE colleges to prepare for them. Mr Deputy Speaker, knowledge of maths is key to the high-tech, cutting-edge jobs in our digital economy. It's also useful, by the way, in less glamorous roles like frontline politics. So we will expand the Teaching for Mastery of Maths programme to a further 3,000 schools. We'll provide £40 million to train maths teachers across the country. We'll introduce a £600 maths premium for schools for every additional pupil who takes A-level core and A-level or core maths, and we'll invite proposals for new maths schools across England so highly talented young mathematicians can release their potential wherever they live and whatever their background. More maths for everyone. Mr Speaker, don't let anyone say I don't know how to show the nation a good time. Computer science is also at the heart of this revolution. So we'll ensure that every secondary school pupil can study computing by tripling the number of trained computer science teachers to 12,000. And we'll work with industry to create a new national centre for computing. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, rapid technological change means we also need to help people to retrain during their working lives, ensuring that our workforce is equipped with the skills they need for the workplace of the future. So today, my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, and I are launching an historic partnership between government, the CBI and the TUC to set the strategic direction for a national retraining scheme. Its first priority will be to boost digital skills and to support expansion of the construction sector. And to make a start immediately, we will invest £30 million in the development of digital skills distance learning courses so people can learn wherever they are and whenever they want. And I'm pleased to be able to accept the representation that I've received from the TUC to continue to fund Union Learn, which I recognise as a valuable part of our support to workplace learning. Mr Deputy Speaker.
Apparently they don't,
Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, backing skills. I got an email from Len asking me specially, so I couldn't say no. Backing skills is key to unlocking growth nationally, but far too much of our economic strength is concentrated in our capital city. If we are truly to build an economy that's fit for the future, then we have to get all parts of the UK firing on all cylinders. And that is what our modern industrial strategy is all about. Today, we back the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine and elected mayors across the UK. We back them with a new £1.7 billion Transforming Cities Fund, half of it to be shared by the 6 areas with elected metro mayors to give them the firepower to deliver on local transport priorities, and the remainder will be open to competition by other cities in England. We're investing £300 million to ensure that HS2 infrastructure will accommodate future Northern Powerhouse and Midland Engine rail improvements. I'm also providing £30 million today to trial new solutions to improve mobile and digital connectivity on trains on the Trans-Pennine route. We're developing a local industrial strategy with Manchester, and I'm pleased to announce a second devolution deal with Andy Street in the West Midlands. We've agreed a new devolution deal with North of the Tyne, and we will fund the replacement of the 40-year-old rolling stock on the Tyne and Wear Metro at a total investment of £337 million. We'll invest £123 million in the Redcar Steelworks site to support the ambitious plans of our new Tees Valley Mayor, Ben Houchen, and my honourable friend for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, who are leading the fight for prosperity in their area. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, we're piloting 100% business rates retention in London next year and continuing to work with TfL on the funding and financing of Crossrail 2. We will also make over £1 billion of discounted lending available to local authorities across the country to support high-value infrastructure projects. A Conservative government giving power back to the people of Britain and driving prosperity and greater fairness across our United Kingdom. Mr Deputy Speaker, the decisions taken in this budget also mean £2 billion more for the Scottish Government, £1.2 billion more for the Welsh Government, and over £650 million more for a Northern Ireland executive. I can confirm today that progress is being made on city deals for Tay Cities and Stirling and on a growth deal for Borderlands. I'm getting used, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the experience of having my ear bent by 13 Scottish Conservative colleagues. Most recently on the issue of Scottish Police and Fire VAT. The SNP knew the rules, they knew the consequences of introducing these bodies, and they ploughed ahead anyway. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, my Scottish Conservative colleagues have persuaded me that the Scottish people should not lose out just because of the obstinacy of the SNP government. So we will legislate to allow VAT refunds from April 2018. And in response to yet more representations from my honourable Scottish friends, aided and abetted by my honourable friend for Waveney, from November 2018, we will introduce transferable tax history for transfers of oil and gas fields in the North Sea, an innovative tax policy that will encourage new entrants to bring fresh investment to a basin that still holds up to 20 billion barrels of oil. We will begin negotiations towards growth deals for North Wales and Mid Wales, and we'll abolish tolls on the Severn Bridge as promised by the end of next year. We'll deliver on our commitment to review the effect of VAT and APD on tourism in Northern Ireland, reporting at next year's budget, and we will open negotiations for a Belfast City deal as part of our commitment to a comprehensive and ambitious set of city deals across Northern Ireland. A Conservative government delivering for all parts of our United Kingdom. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is only by supporting our regions and nations, dealing with our debts and investing in skills and infrastructure for the long term that we can build an economy fit for the future. But I recognise that many people are feeling pressure on their budgets now. And because we are all in politics to make people's lives better, in the short term as well as the long term, we will take further measures in this budget to help families and businesses where we can. Mr Deputy Speaker, the switch to universal credit is a long overdue and necessary reform. Replacing Labour's broken system that discouraged people from working more than 16 hours a week and trapped 1.4 million on out-of-work benefits for nearly a decade. Universal credit delivers a modern welfare system where work always pays and people are supported to earn. But I recognise, Mr Deputy Speaker, the genuine concerns on both sides of the House about the operational delivery of this benefit, and today we will act on those concerns. First, we will remove the 7-day waiting period applied at the beginning of a benefit claim so that entitlement to universal credit will start on the day of the claim. To provide greater support during the waiting period, we will change the advances system to ensure that any household that needs it can access a full month's payment within 5 days of applying. We will make it possible to apply for an advance online. We will extend the repayment period for advances from 6 months to 12 months, and any new universal credit claimant in receipt of housing benefit at the time of the claim will continue to receive that housing benefit for a further 2 weeks, making it easier for them to pay their rent. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a £1.5 billion package to address concerns about the delivery of the benefit. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, will give further details in a statement to the House tomorrow. Mr Deputy Speaker, we also want to help low-income households in areas where rents have been rising fastest. In the long run, of course, the answer lies in increasing the amount of housing available, a theme I shall return to. But in the meantime, the best way to help them is by increasing the rate of support in those areas where rents are least affordable. So we will increase targeted affordability funding by £125 million over the next 2 years, benefiting 140,000 people. We will always listen to genuine concerns and act where we can to help. Mr Deputy Speaker, making work pay is core to the philosophy of this government. That is why we introduced the national living wage in 2016. From April, it will rise by 4.4%, from £7.50 an hour to £7.83, handing full-time workers a further £600 pay increase, taking their total pay rise since its introduction to over £2,000 a year. We also accept the Low Pay Commission's recommendations on national minimum wage rates, supporting our young people with the largest increase in youth rates in 10 years, delivering a pay rise for over 2 million minimum wage workers of all ages across the country. Mr Deputy Speaker, the facts are these. Income inequality today is at its lowest level in 30 years. The top 1% are paying a larger share of income tax than at any time under the last Labour government. The poorest 10% in Britain have seen their real incomes grow faster since 2010 than the richest 10%, and the proportion of full-time jobs that are low-paid is at its lowest level for 20 years. A Conservative government delivering a fairer Britain. But as well as making work pay, we want families to keep more of the money they earn. When we came into office, the personal allowance stood at £6,475 a year. From April, I will increase the personal allowance to £11,850 and the higher rate threshold to £46,350, making progress towards our manifesto commitments, which I reiterate today. The typical basic rate taxpayer will be £1,075 a year better off compared to 2010, and a full-time worker on the national living wage will take home more than £3,800 extra. This Conservative government delivering for Britain's workers. Mr Deputy Speaker, I turn now to duties. The tobacco duty escalator will continue at inflation plus 2%. with an additional 1% duty on hand-rolling tobacco this year, and minimum excise duty on cigarettes will also rise. Excessive alcohol consumption by the most vulnerable people is all too often through cheap, high-strength, low-quality products, especially so-called white ciders. I want to pay tribute to the campaign led by my honourable friend for Congleton on this issue. And so, following our recent consultation, we will legislate to increase duty on these products from 2019. But recognising the pressure on household budgets and backing our great British pubs, duties on other ciders, wines, spirits and on beer will be frozen. This will mean a bottle of whisky will be £1.15 less in 2018 than if we had continued with Labour's plans, and a pint of beer 12p less. So Merry Christmas, Mr Deputy Speaker. The cost of travel is also an important factor for families and businesses. From April 2019, I will again freeze short-haul air passenger duty rates, and I will also freeze long-haul economy rates, paid for by an increase on premium class tickets and on private jets. Sorry, Lewis. For those who don't stretch to a private jet, I can announce a new rail card for those aged 26 to 30, giving 4.5 million more young people a third off their rail fares. And I will, Mr Deputy Speaker, once again cancel the fuel duty rise for both petrol and diesel that is scheduled for April. Since 2010, we will have saved the average car driver £850 and the average van driver over £2,100 compared to Labour's escalator plans. Fuel duty has now been frozen for the longest period in 40 years at a total cost to the Exchequer of £46 billion since 2010. Mr Deputy Speaker, our NHS is one of our great institutions, an essential part of what we are as a nation, and a source of pride, the length and breadth of the country. Its values are the values of the British people, and we will always back it. Dedicated NHS staff are handling the challenges of an ageing population and a rapidly advancing technology with skill and commitment, and we salute them. Mr Deputy Speaker, although you wouldn't think so to listen to the Leader of the Opposition, as he regularly talks down the achievements of the NHS, though you wouldn't think so, the number of patients being treated is at record levels, cancer survival rates are at their highest ever level, 17 million people are now able to access GP appointments in the evenings and at weekends, and public satisfaction amongst hospital inpatients is at its highest level in more than 20 years. It is central to this government's vision that everyone has access to the NHS free at the point of need. That is why we endorsed and funded the NHS's 5-year forward view in 2014. But even with this additional funding, we acknowledge that the service remains under pressure, and today we respond. First, we will deliver an additional £10 billion package of capital investment in frontline services over the course of this Parliament to support the sustainability and transformation plans which will make our NHS more resilient, investing for an NHS fit for the future. But we also recognise that the NHS is under pressure right now. I am therefore exceptionally, and outside the spending review process, making an additional commitment of resource funding of £2.8 billion to the NHS in England. £350 million immediately to allow trusts to plan for this winter, £1.6 billion in 2018-19, with the balance in 1920, taking the extra resource into the NHS next year to £3.75 billion in total. Meaning, Mr Deputy Speaker, meaning that our NHS will receive a £7.5 billion increase to its resource budget over this year and next. Mr Deputy Speaker, our nation's nurses provide invaluable support to us all in our time of greatest need and deserve our deepest gratitude for their tireless efforts. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has already begun discussions with health unions on pay structure modernisation for Agenda for Change staff to improve recruitment and retention. He will submit evidence to the independent pay review body in due course. But I want to assure NHS staff and patients and members of this House that if the Health Secretary's talks bear fruit, I will protect patient services by providing additional funding for such a settlement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just as our public services must be fit for the future, so too must our tax system. It must remain competitive to attract the brightest and the best to establish and grow the businesses of the future. It must raise the revenue we need to fund our public services, and it must be robust against abuse so that it is fair to all. Now, we've heard a lot of talk recently from the party opposite about what they would do to crack down on tax avoidance and evasion. But the truth is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they didn't. It's this government that has clamped down on avoidance and evasion. This government that has seen the tax gap cut by a quarter since 2010 to a record low, and this government that has raked in an extra £160 billion over 7 years for our public services by collecting the taxes that are due. So I'm going to take no lectures, but I will take action, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this budget continues the work of the last 7 years with a further package of measures that is forecast to raise £4.8 billion by 2022-23, doing the job that Labour failed to do for 13 years in office. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our long-term phased reduction of corporation tax has generated investment and jobs and raised £20 billion extra for our public services. We are committed to maintaining Britain's competitive corporation tax rates, but there is a case now for removing the anomaly of the indexation allowance for capital gains, bringing the corporate tax system into line with the personal capital gains tax system. I will therefore freeze this allowance so that companies receive relief for inflation up to January 2018, but not thereafter. I'm grateful to the Office for Tax Simplification for their recent report on the VAT registration threshold. At £85,000, the UK's VAT threshold is by far the highest in the OECD. By contrast, in Germany it is just £15,600. I note the OTS conclusion that it distorts competition and disincentivises business growth. I also note the Federation of Small Businesses' concerns about the cliff edge of the threshold. But such a high threshold also has the benefit of keeping the majority of small businesses out of VAT altogether. So I am not minded to reduce the threshold. But I will consult on whether its design could better incentivise growth, and in the meantime we will maintain it at its current level of £85,000 for the next 2 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we can't build an economy fit for the future without supporting its backbone, our 5.5 million small businesses, who are responsible between them for nearly half of our private sector jobs. They give our economy its extraordinary vibrancy and resilience. But I recognise that many are feeling under pressure right now. And I know that what hard work it is to get a business off the ground, to get it to grow. So today I want to do what we can to ease that pressure. Mr. Deputy Speaker, business rates represent a high fixed cost for small businesses. At Budget 2016, we introduced a package of business rate relief worth almost £9 billion. With a further £435 million in the spring budget. Today I go further. We have listened to concerns about the potential costs of the annual uprating of business rates in April next year. And today I will accept the representation of the British Chambers of Commerce, CBI and other business organisations and bring forward the planned switch from RPI to CPI by 2 years to April 2018. A move which is worth £2.3 billion to business over the next 5 years. I've also listened to businesses affected by the so-called staircase tax. We will change the law to ensure that where a business has been impacted by the Supreme Court ruling, it can have its original bill reinstated if it chooses and backdated. And I hope I can expect cross-party backing to speed that measure through Parliament. Mr Deputy Speaker, 3 simple steps to solve the staircase tax. Well, what do they expect? It's the tax section. Yeah. Mr Deputy Speaker, to support the thousands of small pubs that are at the heart of so many of our communities, we'll extend the £1,000 discount for pubs with a rateable value of less than £100,000 for 1 more year to March 2019. And I've heard the concerns about the 5-yearly revaluation system. Shorter revaluation periods will reduce the size of changes in valuations. So I can announce today that after the next revaluation, future revaluations will take place every 3 years. This Conservative government listening to small business. Yeah. Mr Deputy Speaker, there's a wider concern across this House and in the business community about the tax system in the digital age. Because along with innovation and growth that it brings, digitalisation poses challenges for the sustainability and fairness of our tax system. But this challenge can only properly be solved on an international basis, and the UK is leading the charge in the OECD and the G20 to find solutions. Today we publish a position paper on the tax challenge posed by the digital economy, setting out our emerging thinking about potential solutions. But in the meantime, we will take what action we can. Multinational digital businesses pay billions of pounds in royalties to jurisdictions where they are not taxed, and some of these royalties relate to UK sales. So from April 2019, and in accordance with our international obligations, we will apply income tax to royalties relating to UK sales when those royalties are paid to a low-tax jurisdiction, even if they do not fall to be taxed in the UK under our current rules. Mr Deputy Speaker, this will raise about £200 million a year. It does not solve the problem, but it does send a signal of our determination, and we will continue to work in the international arena to find a sustainable and fair long-term solution that properly taxes the digital businesses that operate in our cyberspace. And following representations from a number of my honourable friends, we are also taking further action to address online VAT fraud, which costs the taxpayer £1.2 billion per year, by making all online marketplaces jointly liable with their sellers for VAT, ensuring that sellers operating through them pay the right amount of VAT, just as we would expect retailers on our high street to do. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to the challenge of the housing market. But before I do, I want to touch on the aftermath of the appalling events at Grenfell Tower. We have provided financial support for the victims of this terrible tragedy, and today I can announce we will provide Kensington and Chelsea Council with a further £28 million for mental health and counselling services, regeneration support for the surrounding areas, and to provide a new community space for local residents. This tragedy should never have happened, and we must ensure that nothing like it ever happens again. All local authorities and housing associations must carry out any identified necessary safety works as soon as possible. And if any local authority cannot access funding to pay for essential fire safety work, they should contact us immediately. I have said before, and I will say again today, we will not allow financial constraints to get in the way of any essential fire safety work. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to also address the issue of empty properties. It cannot be right to leave property empty when so many are desperate for a place to live. So we will legislate to give local authorities the power to charge a 100% council tax premium on empty properties. We will also launch a consultation on barriers to longer tenancies in the private rented sector and how we might encourage landlords to offer them to those tenants who want the extra security. I also want to say something about rough sleeping. It is unacceptable that in 21st century Britain there are people sleeping on the streets. So we'll invest today £28 million in 3 new Housing First pilots in the West Midlands, in Manchester and in Liverpool, and we'll establish a homelessness task force as part of our commitment to halving rough sleeping by 2022 and eliminating it by 2027. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to thank the many colleagues who submitted ideas on how to tackle the challenge of the housing market, including my honourable friends for North East Hampshire, Eastleigh and Weston-super-Mare in particular. By continuing to invest in Britain's infrastructure, skills and R&D, we will ensure the recovery and productivity growth that is the key to delivering our vision of a stronger, fairer, more balanced economy and the assurance to the next generation of their economic security. But however successful we are in that endeavour, there is one area where young people today will rightly feel concern about their future prospects, and that is in the housing market. House prices are increasingly out of reach for many. It takes too long to save for a deposit, and rents absorb too high a portion of monthly income. So the number of 25 to 34-year-olds owning their own home has dropped from 59% to just 38% over the last 13 years. Put simply, successive governments over decades have failed to build enough homes to deliver the home-owning dream that this country has always been proud of, or indeed to meet the needs of those who rent. In Manchester a few weeks ago, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister made a pledge to Britain's younger generation that she would dedicate her premiership to fixing this problem, and today we take the next steps to delivering on that pledge by choosing to build. We send a message to the next generation that getting on the housing ladder is not just a dream of your parents' past, but a reality for your future. We've made a start with schemes like Help to Buy, which has helped over 320,000 people buy a home. We've increased the supply of homes. We've increased the supply of homes by more than 1.1 million since 2010, including nearly 350,000 affordable homes. House building stands at its highest level since the crash, with the latest figures showing that over 217,000 net additional homes were added to the stock last year. That is a remarkable achievement, but we need to do better still if we are to see affordability improve. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a complex challenge and there is no single magic bullet. If we don't increase the supply of land for new homes, more money will simply inflate prices and make matters worse. If we don't do more to support the growth of the SME house building sector that was all but wiped out by Labour's Great Recession, we will remain dependent on the major national house builders that dominate the industry. And if we don't train the construction workers of tomorrow, we may generate planning permissions, but we will not turn them into homes. So solving this challenge will require money, it will require planning reform, and it will require intervention. So today we set out an ambitious plan to tackle the housing challenge. Over the next 5 years, we will commit a total of at least £44 billion of capital funding, loans and guarantees to support our housing market, to boost the supply of skills, resources and building land, and to create the financial incentives necessary to deliver 300,000 net additional homes a year on average by the mid-2020s, the biggest annual increase in housing supply since 1970. New money for the Home Builders Fund to get SME house builders building again, a £630 million small sites fund to unstick the delivery of 40,000 homes, a further £2.7 billion to more than double the Housing Infrastructure Fund, £400 million more for estate regeneration, a £1.1 billion fund to unlock strategic sites, including new settlements and urban regeneration schemes, a lifting of HRA caps for councils in high-demand areas to get them building again, and £8 billion of new financial guarantees to support private house building and the purpose-built private rented sector. And because we need a workforce to build these new homes, we're providing an additional £34 million to develop construction skills across the country. Mr Deputy Speaker, solving the housing challenge takes more than money, it takes planning reform. We will focus on the urban areas where people want to live and where most jobs are created, making best use of our urban land and continuing the strong protection of our green belt. in particular building high-quality, high-density homes in city centres and around major transport hubs. And to put the needs of our young people first, we will ensure that councils in high-demand areas permit more homes for local first-time buyers and affordable renters. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, will set out more detail in a statement to the House in due course. However, one thing is very clear. There is a significant gap between the number of planning permissions granted and the number of homes built. In London alone, there are 270,000 residential planning permissions unbuilt. We need to understand why, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I am establishing an urgent review to look at the gap between planning permissions and housing starts. It will be chaired by my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, and will deliver an interim report. In time for the spring statement next year. And if that report finds that vitally needed land is being withheld from the market for commercial rather than technical reasons, we will intervene to change the incentives to ensure such land is brought forward for development using direct intervention, compulsory purchase powers as necessary. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said we will fix this problem, and no one should doubt the government's determination to do so. But the solution will not deliver itself. Local authorities will need help and support. Developers will need encouragement and persuasion. Infrastructure to facilitate higher density development must be funded and delivered. So the Homes and Communities Agency will expand to become Homes England, bringing together money, expertise and planning and compulsory purchase powers with a clear remit to facilitate delivery of sufficient new homes where they are most needed to deliver a sustained improvement in housing affordability. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the battle to achieve and sustain affordability will be a long-term one, so we also need to look beyond this Parliament to long-term measures. We will use new town development corporations to kick-start 5 new locally agreed garden towns in areas of demand pressure, delivered through public-private partnerships designed to attract long-term capital investment from around the world. Last week, the National Infrastructure Commission published their report on the Cambridge-Milton Keynes-Oxford corridor. Today, we back their vision and commit to building up to 1 million homes by 2050, completing the road and rail infrastructure to support them. And as a down payment on this plan, we've agreed an ambitious housing deal with Oxfordshire to deliver 100,000 homes by 2031, capitalising on the global reputations of our 2 most famous universities and Britain's biggest new town to create a dynamic new growth corridor for the 21st century. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is our plan to deliver on the pledge we have made to the next generation, that the dream of home ownership will become a reality in this country once again. But I also want to take action today to help young people who are saving to own a home. One of the biggest challenges facing young first-time buyers is the cash required up front. We've put £10 billion more money into Help to Buy equity loan to help those saving for a deposit. But I want to do more still. I've received representations for a temporary stamp duty holiday to first-time buyers, but this would only help those who are ready to purchase now and would offer nothing for the many who will need to save for years. So with effect from today, for all first-time buyer purchases up to £300,000, I am abolishing stamp duty altogether.
Friends have to let the Chancellor finish. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
And, Mr Deputy Speaker, to ensure that this relief also helps first-time buyers in very high-price areas like London, it will also be available on the first £300,000 of the purchase price of properties up to £500,000, meaning an effective reduction of £5,000. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is a stamp duty cut for 95% of all first-time buyers who pay stamp duty, and no stamp duty at all for 80% of first-time buyers from today. Mr Deputy Speaker, when we say we will revive the home-owning dream in Britain, we mean it. We do not underestimate the scale of the challenge, but today we have made a substantial down payment. Mr Deputy Speaker, one of the things that I love most about this country is its sense of opportunity. I've always felt it, and I want young people growing up today to have that same sense of boundless opportunity. In this budget, I've set out a vision for Britain's future and a plan for delivering it. But by getting our debt down, by supporting British families and businesses, by investing in the technologies and the skills of the future, by creating the homes and the infrastructure our country needs, we are at a turning point in our history, and we resolve to look forwards, not backwards, to build on the strengths of the British economy, to embrace change, not hide from it, to seize the opportunities ahead of us, and together to build a Britain fit for the future. I commend this statement to the House.
Standing Order number 51, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? Formally. The question is that pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. Stamp duty, land tax, higher rates for additional dwellings, motion number 35. Stamp duty, land tax relief for the first-time buyers, motion number 30.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.